This is the real reason Max Verstappen, a four-time Formula One world champion, is seriously considering walking away from the sport before his contract expires. Not because of a rival, not because of team politics, but because of a rulebook that has fundamentally changed what it feels like to drive a Formula One car. Verstappen's contract runs through the end of 2028, and yet standing in the Bahrain pit lane in February 2026, at the first pre-season test of a completely new regulatory era, he reached for words that landed differently than anything he had said before. The new cars, he told reporters, felt like Formula E on steroids. And the sentence that cut deepest was this one: "A winning car for me, that doesn't matter. It needs to be fun to drive as well." For a driver who has built his entire identity around the pursuit of winning, that statement signals something has shifted. You need to understand what changed in 2026, why those changes happened, and why Verstappen finds them harder to accept than almost anyone else in that paddock. The 2026 regulations brought the most sweeping technical overhaul Formula One had undergone in years, built around a near 50-50 split between the internal combustion engine and the electrical hybrid system. Gone was the MGU-H that had previously harvested energy directly from the turbocharger. Active aerodynamics arrived in its place. The cars became smaller and lighter. Everything runs on 100% sustainable fuel. On paper, it reads like a forward-thinking package, and for the manufacturers who pushed for it, that is exactly what it was. Honda's return to Formula One with Aston Martin happened partly because of these regulations, and Audi's entry as a brand new constructor happened for the same reason. Both companies carry significant electric and hybrid road car interests, and both lobbied hard for a higher electrification ratio inside the power unit. They got what they asked for, and Verstappen knows it. His assessment of the political reality behind the rules was direct. If it was, up to non-political aspects of making a regulation, I think the car would have probably looked very different. That is a measured way of saying the regulations serve the boardroom as much as they serve the racetrack. And that distinction matters enormously to a driver like Verstappen. The business case was made, the rules were written, and now every driver on the grid has to live inside them until at least 2030. The technical detail that makes all of this real is a single number. The 2026 car's battery holds 4 megajoules of energy, and at full electrical deployment, that battery drains from completely full to completely empty in approximately 11 seconds. 11 seconds of flat-out driving before the electrical side of the power unit is spent. What this creates, across the length of a Grand Prix, is a constant cycling of partial charge and discharge, with drivers forced to think about energy recovery on every straight of every lap rather than simply driving as fast as the car will go. The techniques required under these rules tell the story clearly. Drivers downshift aggressively on straights to harvest electrical energy back into the battery. Lift and coast maneuvers happen earlier and more often than in any previous generation of car. Throttle inputs are carefully timed around the deployment cycle rather than driven purely by instinct. A new approach called engine clipping even sees electrical deployment paused late on a straight, with the combustion engine compensating by revving harder to fill the gap. None of it resembles the kind of driving that defined Verstappen's 4 championship years. At the Bahrain test, his description of the problem was blunt. It's mainly that you're very energy inefficient on the straights. On this circuit, it's still manageable. But we're also going to tracks where it will be a real disaster. The tracks he named by name were Melbourne, Monza, Spa, and Las Vegas. All circuits with the kind of long, flat straights where the battery will drain fastest and drivers will be forced to back off, potentially with cars moving at significantly different speeds in the same zone. His frustration came through most clearly in what he asked for. Not a minor adjustment, not a tweak to the software, but a structural reversal. I want us to actually stay away from Formula E and be Formula One. So don't increase the battery, actually get rid of that and focus on a nice engine and have Formula E as Formula E. A 4-time world champion publicly calling for the sport to undo one of its central technical decisions is not a small moment. That is a statement of values. Not everyone in the paddock shares his view, and the contrast is worth sitting with. Lando Norris came out of Bahrain testing, describing the 2026 cars as a lot of fun, a position that put him in a fairly small group among the senior drivers. Lewis Hamilton's concern ran in a different direction, describing the new cars as so technically demanding that you need a degree to fully understand it all. Fernando Alonso's critique was perhaps the sharpest of all. suggesting the energy management requirements make certain corners so simple to navigate that members of the media or his team's chef could drive through them. Alonso was saying in his own way that the sport has moved away from what separates a racing driver from everyone else. Formula One CEO Stefano Domenicali responded publicly, stating he could guarantee Verstappen wanted to stay, and that dialogue about possible rule adjustments was continuing ahead of and after the Australian Grand Prix in March 2026. Red Bull team principal Laurent Mekies expressed zero concern, confident that Verstappen would master the new regulations just as he had mastered every previous set. Both responses are logical. Neither one addresses the actual issue Verstappen is raising. Mastery is not the point. The point, as he has stated repeatedly, is that he does not want to spend years of his career managing battery cycles instead of racing a car. And this is where the story moves beyond frustration and into something more concrete. Because while Verstappen has been vocal about what he dislikes in Formula One, he has also been quietly building an alternative. Back in 2024, racing under the alias Franz Hermann to avoid attention, Verstappen entered Nürburgring endurance events to earn his DMSBB license, the qualification from the German Motorsport Authority required to compete in the Nürburgring 24 hours. His GT3 debut came in an Emil Frey Racing Ferrari 296 GT3, and he won it on his first attempt. Lap times across that qualifying process dropped from 7 minutes, 56 seconds, down to 7 minutes, 48 seconds on new tyres. A progression that showed this was not a hobby project. On the 24th of December 2025, Verstappen.com Racing, his own team, announced a multi-year partnership with Mercedes-AMG to compete in the GT World Challenge Europe in a GT3 program. Confirmed to race in the Nürburgring 24 hours on May 16 and 17, 2026, he will drive a Mercedes-AMG GT3 with Winward Racing alongside Jules Goonan, Danny Juncadella and Lucas Auer. The calendar for that event was reorganised specifically to fit into the gap between the Miami Grand Prix and the Canadian Grand Prix, 2 weeks on either side. Le Mans, Daytona, and Sebring have all been named as future targets. Back in the Bahrain paddock, comparing endurance racing to the new Formula One cars, Verstappen allowed himself a dry observation. Looking at it now, at least you can drive flat out there without looking after my battery. What makes all of this more than paddock noise appeared months before he ever sat in the 2026 car. At the Qatar Grand Prix in November 2025, Verstappen told the PA news agency, "My contract runs until 2028, but it will depend on the new rules in 2026, and if they are nice and fun. If they are not fun, then I don't really see myself hanging around." And then came the sentence that changed the tone of the entire conversation. "I have a lot of other passions, other racing categories. I want to spend more time with the family and live off my own schedule. And in my mind, I know if I close the chapter, it is closed. I don't see myself stopping and coming back. Closing the chapter permanently. A 28-year-old with 4 world titles, a contract through 2028, and an endurance racing program that is already operational, saying that walking away from Formula One would mean walking away for good. The regulations he is pushing against are locked in until at least 2030, which means even if the margins get adjusted after Australia, the underlying architecture of battery management racing does not change. Verstappen understands that. And so the question sitting in front of him is not whether he has the talent to adapt, it is whether he wants to give those years to a version of racing that he does not believe in. The real reason Verstappen might quit Formula One comes down to something that has nothing to do with performance, contracts, or politics. Throughout his career, across 4 championships and hundreds of race weekends, the one thing that has remained constant is that he wants to drive a car at its absolute limit without a battery management strategy shaping every input on every straight of every lap. The 2026 regulations, written partly to satisfy the demands of manufacturers who needed a stronger electrification story, have moved the sport away from that in a way he finds genuinely difficult to accept. Whether the racing turns out better than he fears, or whether winning finds a way of changing his perspective, the endurance racing infrastructure he has already built tells you something about where his mind is. The Nürburgring 24 hours entry is confirmed, the team is running, the license is earned, and the calendar has been adjusted to accommodate him. That level of preparation does not come from someone keeping their options casually open. If you want to keep following how this plays out across the 2026 season, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below telling us whether you think Verstappen's concerns about the new regulations are justified or whether this is the greatest driver of his generation, finding it harder than he expected to adapt to a new challenge.